fined me $500 for fishing on my own damn dock. No warning, no neighborly chat, no, "Hey Jack, let's talk about this," just a laminated citation handed to me like a subpoena by a woman in rhinestone flip-flops with a Bluetooth headset and the moral authority of a parking meter. Her name was Brianna Laird, and she came charging down the hill like I'd stolen fish from a church pond. Phone out, camera rolling. "Violation of HOA Regulation 14B, she said, like she was quoting federal code. Now, I've been fined in life, sure. A speeding ticket in Tulsa, a parking mishap outside a Cracker Barrel, but never for standing on a dock my grandfather built in 1983. This wasn't just overreach. It was full-on delusion. The lake? My grandfather bought it before the HOA even existed. The dock? My childhood memory. The fish? Honestly, they probably knew my last name. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. If you're into true feeling stories with big twists, poetic justice, and just enough HOA drama to make your blood boil and your coffee taste better, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story takes things to a whole new level, and believe me, the next surprise? It's the kind you'll want front row seats for. At first, I thought she was joking. I even smiled, thinking this might be a TikTok prank or some new form of neighborly hazing, but she just kept recording, narrating the whole scene like she was filming an episode of Law & Order Backyard Division. She cited code numbers, fine amounts, and community expectations like she was reading scripture. That dock had been in my family since 1983. My grandfather built it with his own hands. Oak beams, rusted nails, and about 6 decades of attitude. It wasn't just a dock, it was a piece of our bloodline that you could stand on. And now some HOA president with a Wi-Fi connection and a PDF template thought she could write me out of the picture? No, ma'am, my name's Jack McAllister. I've been gutting fish on that dock since I was 9, and the only community regulation I ever respected was don't pee up. But now here I was, holding a glossy fine like it was a coupon for humiliation. Brianna wasn't just enforcing rules, she was performing power. And I was the unlucky extra who stumbled into her one-woman HOA reality show. But as the ridiculousness sank in, so did something else, anger. The kind that simmers beneath your ribs, not loud but low and steady. Not because I got fined, but because of what it meant. Someone decided they had authority where they didn't. Someone thought they could rewrite history with a laser printer and some pre-cut HOA letterhead. Brianna didn't just walk up and fine me. She stomped into my family's legacy like it was an abandoned garage sale. She knew my name, said it like she'd studied it. That's when it clicked. This wasn't random. This was planned. She'd done her homework, dug through records, figured out who owned what, and instead of doing the neighborly thing like knocking, asking, or even leaving a passive-aggressive note, she went full digital sheriff on a man standing on his own grandfather's dock. And the irony? She called me a violator while standing on property she had no right to police. There's a difference between enforcement and intrusion, and she crossed that line in bedazzled sandals with a ring light in her purse. So I did what any man with a sense of decency and a healthy distrust of laminated paperwork would do. I walked straight back to the cabin, the one my grandfather left me, along with a stubborn streak and unshakable sense of what's right. Inside that closet, under an old quilt and a pile of fishing tackle, was the tin box. The box. The one filled with deeds, maps, letters from the county, and enough paper to make a lawyer weep with joy. My grandfather kept every scrap, every receipt, every ink-smudged proof that what was his couldn't be undone by arrogance or Adobe Acrobat. He used to say, "Jack, someday someone's gonna tell you that what's yours ain't. When they do, don't argue, unbox." So I unboxed. I spread out the documents on the kitchen table like war maps, deeds dated before Brianna was even born, survey maps drawn by hand, with boundary lines marked in red and notarized in ink older than her HOA charter. I knew right then she wasn't just wrong, she was deeply, legally, beautifully wrong. And I wasn't just right, I was documented. And right there in the dim light of that cabin, holding the original deed and the survey map in my hands, I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was insane. Not only was I standing on my own dock, but I now had legal proof that the HOA folks, including Brianna with her camera and clipboards, had been using my lake for their parties, barbecues, and fishing tournaments for years without a word of thanks or permission. The dock they threatened to fine me for using, it wasn't just mine, it was the centerpiece of a massive community trespass they didn't even know they were guilty of. And the woman who fined me for fishing, she'd just opened a door she didn't know existed. See, I wasn't planning on raising a fuss. I'd always believed in letting people be so long as they returned the favor. But Brianna didn't return the favor. She brought a war to my dock. And thanks to my grandfather and his tin box, I had a response she wasn't ready for. Not a fight, not a shout, just paper. The kind that makes people very, very quiet. And that's when I knew I wasn't the violator, I was the reckoning. She waved that fine like it was the 10 Commandments, except Moses wasn't live streaming, and I don't remember any scripture about trespassing on your own property. I sat at the kitchen table with that ridiculous document still in my hand, watching the ink smear where my thumb had gripped it too hard. It was printed on heavy stock paper, too expensive for what it was worth, like putting a diamond ring on a tuna can. Outside, the lake shimmered like nothing had happened. But something had. Brianna Laird had crossed a line, and she did it with all the certainty of someone who's never been told no by anyone with a backbone. And me? I've got a backbone, plus documentation. The kind that doesn't bend, the kind that lives in a rusted tin box under a pile of old hunting jackets, just waiting for the right storm. The tin box was exactly where I remembered it. Back of the closet, under the shelf that still sags a little on the left side. It hadn't been opened in years, but it opened like it'd been waiting for this very day. Inside was the scent of old paper and tobacco and the past, stacked and folded with the kind of care that only comes from someone who's been wronged once and swore never again. Deed papers, tax receipts, land surveys, old letters from county officials with polite government phrasing and rubber stamps. I spread them out across the table like puzzle pieces from a forgotten war. My grandfather didn't just own the land, he had it mapped, notarized, certified, and stapled into eternity. And the lake? The lake wasn't shared use, the lake was 70% ours, not a suggestion, not a vague line, a documented, measured, legally binding truth. And Brianna had been hosting HOA events on it like it was her backyard splash pad. I stared at the survey, my finger tracing the outline of the lake like I was seeing it for the first time. This wasn't just a property line, this was a boundary between assumption and reality, between entitlement and evidence. And the irony? The same woman who fined me for standing on my dock had been organizing barbecues, swim lessons, and neighborhood movie nights on land she never had a legal right to touch. She'd been trespassing for years and didn't even know it. It would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly arrogant. The kind of arrogance that walks around with a clipboard and never checks the records. That's the thing about self-appointed power. It's loud until paper speaks. And paper is patient, but permanent. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt focused. That fine had flipped a switch, but this box turned on the lights. I spent the rest of the afternoon scanning everything. Deeds, maps, letters, notes in my grandfather's sharp all-caps handwriting. He'd drawn arrows, labeled trees, measured shoreline in feet and inches. He even included a note to himself that read, "Future-proof. See parcel boundaries." It was like he knew someone would come knocking one day with big hair and small facts. The tin box wasn't storage, it was insurance. Not against storms, but against people like Brianna, who think proximity equals ownership. It was quiet inside that cabin, but the tension outside was building, and I could feel it in my bones like weather before a thunderclap. And if you've ever held proof in your hand while your name's being dragged by someone with no clue what they're up against, you know exactly how electric that silence can be. I called Elena the next morning. She was already mid-coffee and halfway through a property dispute up in Oregon. I told her what I found, sent her the scans, and waited while she looked through them. "Jack," she said, "you're sitting on gold." Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm you hear right before someone drops a chess move they've been planning for weeks. She confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA had no jurisdiction over land it didn't own, and unless they had a time machine, their charter didn't apply to a lake bought 3 decades before they ever held a vote. And more than that, she said, they've been using your property to boost their own community value, and now they want to turn around and fine you for existing? That's not enforcement. That's exploitation with a smile. That line stuck with me because it was true, and the story wasn't just getting bigger, it was getting clearer. And just like that, the real game began. The flip-flop crusader had written her fine like a final word. But what she didn't know was that I had the first word, the middle word, and about a dozen notarized last ones, too. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to pose some angry rant. I was going to walk this out in the oldest way possible, with facts, patience, and a paper trail sharp enough to cut through years of HOA bluster. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's legal, and we were just getting warmed up. If you think handing someone a fine for standing on their own dock is bold, wait until you see what happens when the paperwork fights back. Trust me, Brianna's about to learn that live streaming ignorance has real-world consequences. And this lake? It's about to flip the script on everything the HOA thought it controlled. Hit that subscribe button if you're loving the twists, the justice, and the slow-burn revenge. Tomorrow's chapter? Let's just say, the fine was the fuse, the explosion's next. Don't miss it. You know you're in trouble when the person who fined you for fishing comes back with cookies and tablecloths. Less than 24 hours after I uncovered my grandfather's documents and confirmed our ownership of the lake, Brianna Laird was back, but this time she wasn't waving fines, she was waving scones. Gone were the flip-flops and HOA-issued threat sheets. She was dressed like a Southern belle who'd wandered into a Pottery Barn catalog, complete with a sun hat and a clipboard hidden under a napkin. And right there, on the grassy patch by my shoreline, she set up folding tables, pastel bunting, and a little chalkboard sign that read, Community Appreciation Tea. The same dock she declared off-limits was now the backdrop for a charm offensive disguised as a picnic. If you've never seen manipulation served with lemon wedges and lace, buckle up. This wasn't tea, it was strategy steeped in fear. People came, not a mob, not a protest, worse, neighbors. Good, decent folks who wanted to believe in lemonade and leadership. They sipped and smiled and took pictures like it was a garden party, not a territorial campaign. And Brianna? She worked that crowd like a senator running for re-election. She poured drinks, leaned in close, whispered with just the right amount of concerned eyebrow. Occasionally, she'd glance at my cabin and let her voice rise ever so slightly, just loud enough for key phrases to float across the lake. Unfortunate hostility not aligned with the spirit of our neighborhood, potential legal threats. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. Her finger pointed at the water. Her eyes narrowed at the dock. And her smile? That tight, polite grin you only see at HOA meetings and family reunions when someone brings up politics. The message was clear. Jack McAllister wasn't a neighbor. I was a liability. What do you call a woman hosting a party on land she doesn't own while painting the actual owner as a problem? I call that audacity marinated in denial. But to the crowd, folks who didn't know the deed, didn't see the tin box, she looked like leadership. And me? I was just the guy who wouldn't play along, the one who suddenly disrupted the peace. Public shaming doesn't need truth. It just needs repetition. And Brianna was handing out talking points with every cookie. I saw Doris DeWitt, who once borrowed my hedge trimmer and kept it for 8 months, nodding along like she was watching a sermon. I saw Tom Reyes jotting something in a notebook. And every time someone glanced in my direction, it wasn't with curiosity, it was with caution. That's how fear works. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't ask for proof. It just needs a story simple enough to repeat. Inside my cabin, I watched the whole performance through the window. I didn't interrupt, didn't storm out. That's what she wanted. She wasn't baiting me into an argument. She was building a case, a narrative, a campaign. Let the record show she tried to unite the community. Let it show she was gracious, open, and calm, even when I, the villain in her HOA horror film, refused to engage. She was turning perception into precedent. I could see it happening in real time, like watching someone slowly Photoshop you out of your own family photo. That's the thing about manufactured fear. It moves fast, faster than facts. And if no one stands up to it early, it becomes the truth people build fences around. But I wasn't going to play defense, not with the truth on my side and a tin box full of quiet power. So I took photos, documented the entire tea party, its location, its host, its smiling attendees standing squarely on land they didn't know belonged to me. Every cup, every folding chair, every faux gracious gesture was one more line in a future affidavit. And while they poured sugar into porcelain, I prepared the counterpunch, because sometimes the best way to deal with charm weaponized as control is not to fight louder, but to record longer. She wasn't just hosting tea, she was staging a coup, and the next move? It wasn't going to be served on a napkin. The meeting started like every HOA meeting does, late, awkward, and pretending to be more important than it really was. We were packed into the community center, which was really just Walt Brenner's converted garage with folding chairs and that one flickering fluorescent light that made everyone look guilty. Brianna had already set up camp at the front, projector running, laptop open, a stack of papers taller than her sense of humility, and of course, front and center, her phone, mounted on a tripod, live streaming the entire thing like it was a Supreme Court hearing instead of a neighborhood showdown over a dock and a fine. She didn't just want to win. She wanted witnesses. She wanted likes. But what she didn't realize was that the moment she hit go live, she wasn't controlling the story anymore. She was documenting her own collapse. She opened the meeting with the kind of speech that sounds practiced but not understood. Big words, bigger drama, community integrity, preservation of values, emerging threats to cohesion. I half expected her to roll out a PowerPoint titled, "Why Jack McAllister is the Enemy of Peace." She didn't say my name directly at first, but she didn't have to. Every eye turned toward me when she referenced individuals leveraging legal loopholes to destabilize community trust. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and waited. Let her talk, let her spin the web, because sometimes the best move isn't to interrupt the show, it's to let the projector overheat. And spoiler alert, it did. Then came my turn. Howard Brenner, who'd been dragged back from HOA retirement like a reluctant referee, called me up with a nod. I didn't bring a slideshow, no dramatic monologue, just a folder, a manila folder and a calm voice. The property deed, I began, dates back to 1983. The HOA was formed in 2019. This isn't opinion, it's county record. I passed out copies of the survey, pointed out boundary lines, and laid down the time, not with rage, not with sarcasm, just fact. And facts, as it turns out, are harder to argue with than charm. As I flipped through each page, the projector dimmed, literally and metaphorically. Brianna tried to interrupt, tried to fact-check me with her phone mid-meeting, but she wasn't armed with evidence, she was armed with vibes. And vibes don't hold up when the paperwork hits the table. Then the room turned. You could feel it. The energy shifted from unsure nods to pointed stares in her direction. The live stream kept rolling, but now it was filming silence. The kind of silence that clings to the walls when people realize they've been backing the wrong person. Someone asked a question, why hadn't we seen this paperwork before? Why did the HOA issue a fine without verifying ownership? Doris, who just clapped at Brianna's tea party 2 days ago, raised her hand and asked why no one had bothered to ask me directly. Tom Reyes stood up and asked for a copy of the deed. Brianna tried to speak again, this time more forcefully, but force isn't the same thing as proof. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Her hand was shaking. And that camera she set up to document her victory? It was now capturing every second of her unraveling in high definition. That's when it really broke. She turned the phone toward the audience and said, "I'm being harassed." Said I was using legal intimidation tactics to bully the board. Said I was manipulating documents to scare the community. She pointed at me, then at Howard, then at the projector, which had frozen on a blurry photo of the lake with a caption that read, "Shared space under dispute." Someone from the back called out, "You're the one who fined him for standing on his own dock?" Another added, "You've been using his land for years without even checking." Brianna's face flushed. Her eyes darted between her camera and the room. And that's when she made the fatal mistake. She lashed out. "You're all too naive to understand what it takes to maintain order," she shouted. And just like that, the mask dropped. She wasn't protecting the community. She was protecting her control. Howard stood up, slow and steady, and made it official. "Motion to vote on a leadership transition," he said. Hands went up, fast, certain, undeniable. 26 in favor, 3 opposed. Brianna didn't even vote. She just stood there, frozen, while her live stream kept recording. She fired herself live on HOA TV. And me? I sat back down, folded up my folder, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally spoken loud enough to be heard. And the irony? Brianna's own live stream, the one she set up to protect transparency, became the most transparent piece of all. She wasn't ousted behind closed doors. She was voted out on the record with a camera in her face and a projector full of half-truths flickering behind her. If you thought that vote ended things, think again. The next part? Let's just say power hates a vacuum, and Brianna wasn't leaving quietly. Hit subscribe because the fallout is about to get messy. And the HOA's next move? It's a whole new level of chaos. After the vote, it didn't get quiet. It got strange. You'd think watching a live stream meltdown and a 26-3 landslide vote would be enough to wrap the whole thing up with a nice little HOA bow. But neighborhoods don't heal like movies end. The morning after Brianna was ousted, the air around here felt thick. Like we all lived in the same place, but were trying to figure out whether we still knew each other. Some folks avoided eye contact. Some waved awkwardly. Others acted like the vote never happened. But truth, once spoken, doesn't go back in the box. It doesn't whisper, it echoes. And over the next week, something remarkable happened. One by one, the people who'd once nodded along at Brianna's tea parties started knocking on my door. Not with apologies, not yet, but with curiosity. And in this kind of story, curiosity is how healing sneaks in. The first was Tom Reyes. He brought a clipboard, out of habit, I think, and asked if we could go over the paperwork again, just to be sure. We sat on my porch with the tin box open between us like it was a family Bible. I didn't perform. I didn't preach. I just showed him what had always been there. Deeds, surveys, permits, notes from the county. Layered proof of ownership that predated the HOA by 35 years. Tom nodded through most of it, then looked out toward the lake and muttered, "I feel like we've been living in a house of cards." And just like that, the first domino fell. Truth has a way of spreading when you let it sit still. That's the funny thing. Brianna had moved fast, loud, and bright, but truth? It spreads like fish jumping upriver. Quiet, surprising, undeniable. Then came Doris DeWitt, clutching a Tupperware container like it was a peace offering from a different lifetime. She stood on the porch and said, "Jack?" I believed her, I really did. She made it sound so urgent, like if we didn't act, we'd lose everything. She handed me the container, lemon bars, slightly overbaked, and added, "Turns out, we were about to lose the only person who actually had a claim to this place." I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the clarity. Doris wasn't the enemy, she was just scared. Brianna had turned fear into a megaphone. I let Doris in, showed her the same papers. Her eyes widened when she saw the original survey. "This isn't just your dock," she whispered. "It's your lake." Her voice cracked a little. We were never the problem, just the owners. And when she left, she promised to start telling the others. Word spread faster than I expected. Not because people love justice, but because they hate feeling fooled. Brianna's narrative so shiny, so confident, collapsed like a pop-up tent in a windstorm. And the people who once backed her started asking new questions. Not just about me, but about the entire structure she'd built. The fines, the rules, the votes that had passed under her leadership. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't a community. It was a suspect. Walt Brenner came out of retirement, called for a review of every action taken under Brianna's term. People started showing up to meetings who hadn't come in years. The energy had shifted. For the first time in a long time, folks weren't just showing up to complain. They came to understand. That's when you know something real is happening. Not when people yell, but when they listen. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't post some triumphant message or throw a barbecue on my newly reclaimed shoreline. I just kept my door open and my tone calm. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about rebuilding. Leadership, I've learned, isn't seized, it's revealed. It shows up in how you handle the quiet moments, not just the loud ones. And over time, the community stopped seeing me as a disruption and started seeing me as something else. Steady. And that mattered. Because we didn't just change the vote. We changed the HOA, not with speeches or slogans, but with one truth at a time, passed from porch to porch like a lantern in the dark. Funny thing about outrage. It burns fast, but resolution takes its sweet time. After Brianna's exit and the truth about the lake spread like spring pollen, there was still the matter of what to do next. See, it's one thing to expose bad leadership. It's another to build something better after the dust settles. And in that dust, a lot of awkward glances and quiet guilt. That's when Walt Brenner called me and asked if I'd be open to a formal arrangement, something that would keep the peace and make the boundaries real. I told him I didn't want to put up fences, just clarity. Clarity, he said, might be worth more than land. And that's how we ended up sitting at my kitchen table drafting a private agreement, $200, 0 cents a month, from the HOA for continued access to the lake. No drama, no trespassing, just acknowledgement, finally, in ink. $200 won't make a man rich, won't pay for much more than bait, beer, and a yearly fishing license. But to me, that check felt like a receipt for truth. A quiet signature from the same system that once fined me for standing still. It wasn't about the money. It was the message. They called me selfish while using what was never theirs. They painted me as a threat while holding their meetings on my shore. And now? Now the same board was mailing me monthly confirmation that my grandfather's legacy still stood, docked intact, ownership intact, dignity intact. You don't need a parade when you've got the paper. And paper, like the lake, remembers who it belongs to. And just like that, something shifted. Not in some big town hall speech kind of way. No, this was quieter, like kids laughing at the dock again, like neighbors waving without hesitation, like Shirley DeWitt asking if her grandkids could fish out back, followed by a homemade pie and 0 assumptions. The lake didn't change, but we did. It stopped being a battleground and went back to being a place for sunscreen and story. It was the first time in years I saw people treat it like a shared blessing, not a stage for control. And that dock, it became a bridge between the way things were and the way things could be. Turns out, property lines aren't just about borders. They're about respect. Sometimes I sit out there with a cup of coffee and think about my grandfather. He'd built that dock with no blueprint but intuition, and no audience but me and the geese. He didn't fight with emails or fines. He kept receipts, sure, but mostly he kept faith in people, in boundaries, in the belief that decency could outlast drama. I used to think he was just cautious. Now I know he was planting anchors for a storm that hadn't hit yet. That tin box wasn't just a file cabinet. It was a compass. And when the storm came, in the form of fines, live streams, and lemon-scented deception, I knew exactly where to stand. Right where he left me. So here we are, HOA check arrives on the 1st, kids cannonball off the dock by noon, neighbors bring snacks instead of subpoenas, and the best part? No more laminated threats posted on my porch. Sometimes I still hear Brianna's voice echo in my head, her courtroom tone, her clipped phrases, but now they sound like someone trying to command a lake with a printed map. And lakes don't care about titles. They remember who walked their banks before the rules were written. Turns out, respecting property isn't just good law, it's how communities survive. And if you're wondering whether it was all worth it, the fines, the false accusations, the months of silence and suspicion, let me say this, absolutely. Because peace built on truth lasts longer than control built on fear. I didn't set out to change the HOA. I just wanted to fish in peace. But sometimes standing your ground quietly is the loudest thing you can do. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. And that truth? It outlived the noise. The dock still stands, the lake still shimmers, and for the first time in years, I belong here, without explanation. If you've ever been labeled the problem just for defending what's yours, this story was for you. If you've ever felt outnumbered but knew you were right, this was your lake. And maybe the biggest lesson of all? You don't have to fight dirty to win clean. Sometimes a tin box, a calm voice, and a whole lot of patience is the fiercest kind of justice there is. Because justice isn't just about payback, it's about legacy. About leaving behind something quieter, stronger, and better than what tried to take it from you. So if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your grandfather's steadiness or your own silent victories, let us know in the comments. We want to hear your story. Hit that like button if you believe communities should be built on respect, not fear. And don't forget to subscribe because we've got more stories coming. Real ones, wild ones, the kind that stick with you long after the HOA flyers stop showing up. This wasn't just a fight over a dock. It was a lesson in dignity. And trust me, you'll want to be here for what comes next.